Why planes don't fly over the Pacific Ocean. Look at a flight map from Los Angeles to Tokyo, and at first, something seems strangely off. The plane does not cut a neat straight line across the wide blue Pacific the way the eye expects. Instead, the route bends upward, curving north, sometimes toward Alaska, sometimes near the edge of the Arctic, almost as if pilots are carefully staying away from the ocean beneath them. It looks cautious. It looks mysterious. It almost looks like fear. But the truth is even more surprising. Planes are not really avoiding the Pacific. They are following the true shape of the Earth. The story begins long before sleek jetliners crossed oceans in a single night, back when flying across the Pacific sounded less like transportation and more like a dangerous dream. In the early 1900s, airplanes were still fragile inventions, built from wood, fabric, wire, and noisy engines that shook like machinery barely holding itself together. They could fly, but not for long. They could climb, but not very high. And the Pacific Ocean was not just another distance on a map. It was a vast emptiness. Ships had crossed that ocean for centuries, moving slowly between Asia, North America, and scattered island chains across the water. But ships could stop, repair, drift, and wait. Aircraft had no such luxury. They needed fuel, they needed maintenance, they needed weather information, radio contact, and most importantly, somewhere to land if trouble appeared. Over the Pacific, those safe places were few and far apart. Early aviation pioneers imagined a world where continents could be connected by air, but the machines were not ready yet. Engines failed too often. Weather forecasting was still primitive. Radio signals did not reach far enough. Navigation over endless water depended on dead reckoning, stars, instruments, and a pilot's steady nerves while surrounded by nothing but sky above and waves below. So the first serious Pacific air routes did not simply jump from one continent to another. They moved carefully, step by step, island by island, coast to coast. Every stop was not just a convenience. Every stop was a lifeline. By the 1930s, the Pacific finally began to feel a little smaller, not because the ocean had changed, but because aircraft had become bigger, stronger, and more ambitious. Flying boats became the first great solution to the Pacific problem. These enormous aircraft could take off from water and land on water, which made them almost perfectly suited for an ocean where proper runways were rare. Pan American's famous Clippers turned Pacific travel into something that felt almost unreal for the time. They lifted from San Francisco Bay, crossed to Hawaii, then continued across the ocean through a chain of island stations like Midway, Wake Island, Guam, and finally Manila. These were not quick flights in the modern sense. They were journeys. Long, elegant, risky airborne voyages across one of the largest empty spaces on Earth. Passengers did not simply board a plane and settle into a narrow seat. They stepped into something closer to a flying ocean liner. There were meals, sleeping berths, wide windows, polished interiors, and the steady drone of engines carrying them over thousands of miles of open water. Yet even in that glamorous age, the route was never random. The airplane did not go wherever the pilot wished. It followed fuel stops, radio stations, weather reports, island bases, and emergency options. Then came war, and the Pacific changed again. During World War II, the ocean became one of the most important airspaces on the planet. Military engineers built airfields across islands that had once seemed like tiny dots lost in the blue. Runways appeared in remote places, chosen not for comfort or tourism, but for strategy, supply, and survival. After the war, many of those routes, bases, and airfields helped shape the foundation of modern trans-Pacific aviation. The Pacific was no longer impossible, but it was still a serious challenge. Everything changed when the jet age arrived. Aircraft like the Boeing 707, the Douglas DC-8, and later wide-body giants such as the Boeing 747 gave airlines something earlier pilots could only imagine: real speed, higher altitude, longer range, and a level of reliability that made ocean crossings feel routine instead of heroic. Suddenly, crossing the Pacific became part of normal global travel. People could fly from California to Japan, from Australia to Hawaii, from Asia to the west coast of North America. What once felt like an expedition became a scheduled flight printed neatly on a ticket, announced at an airport gate, and served with dinner at cruising altitude. But this is exactly where one of aviation's biggest misunderstandings begins. On a flat map, the shortest route appears to be a clean, straight line across the middle of the Pacific. A traveler looks at that map and naturally wonders why the plane bends north. Why does it curve toward Alaska? Why not just fly directly across the ocean in one simple line? The answer is geometry. Earth is not flat, it is a sphere. And on a sphere, the shortest path between two distant points is called a great circle route. When that real-world route is drawn onto a flat rectangular map, it often looks curved. It seems longer, it feels indirect. But in three-dimensional reality, it is often the shortest and most efficient way to travel. That strange northern arc is not a detour, it is a shortcut. A flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo may look like it is bending strangely toward Alaska, but the aircraft is simply following the natural curve of the planet. The flat map makes it look suspicious. The globe reveals what is really happening. The map bends the truth. The Earth explains the route. Modern aircraft cross the Pacific every single day. They fly from North America to Asia, from Asia to Australia, from the United States to Hawaii, from New Zealand to the Americas, and across many other long oceanic routes. So the idea that planes don't fly over the Pacific is not literally true. What they avoid is not the Pacific itself. They avoid unnecessary danger, wasted fuel, severe weather, poor routing, and areas that would leave them too far from help if something went wrong. Every long-haul flight is planned with layers of invisible logic that passengers rarely notice. Dispatchers study winds, storms, turbulence, volcanic ash, restricted military airspace, fuel burn, oceanic tracks, and emergency airports. The route may look unusual on the seatback screen, but every bend has a reason. What appears strange from inside the cabin is usually the result of careful calculation. One major factor is diversion planning. Airliners must remain within a certified distance of suitable airports in case an emergency forces them to land. Decades ago, twin-engine aircraft faced much stricter limits over remote oceans. They had to stay closer to alternate airports because engines were less reliable and regulations were more cautious. In those days, flying far across empty water was not only a question of distance, it was a question of trust. As engines improved, the rules evolved. Modern twin-engine jets like the Boeing 777, Boeing 787, and Airbus A350 are certified for long-range oceanic operations. They can safely fly routes that would have been difficult or restricted for earlier aircraft. This changed aviation in a major way. Airlines no longer needed 4 engines simply to cross huge oceans. 2 highly reliable engines could do the job and do it efficiently. Still, route planning remains careful. Pilots do not simply point the nose toward the emptiest part of the Pacific and hope everything works out. They fly routes that balance distance, wind, safety, fuel, weather, and available alternate airports. Winds also play a powerful role. High above Earth, jet streams move like fast rivers in the sky. Flying with them can save fuel and reduce flight time. Flying against them can burn thousands of extra pounds of fuel, so the route may shift north on one day and farther south on another. The path is not fixed like a road painted on the ocean. It changes with the atmosphere. That is why the modern Pacific crossing is not one simple line. It is a moving puzzle. The strangest part is that the routes that look the most wrong on a flat map are often the ones that make the most sense in the sky. A flight path curving toward Alaska may appear longer to the eye, but on a round planet, that arc can be the shortest way between 2 distant cities. Meanwhile, a route that looks perfectly straight across the middle of the Pacific may actually waste fuel, add time, and leave the aircraft farther from safe diversion airports. There is another hidden twist. A plane may sometimes fly more miles over the ground and still arrive earlier, simply because it is riding a powerful tailwind high above the ocean. Jet streams can push aircraft forward like invisible rivers, turning a longer-looking route into the faster choice. And sometimes the whole mystery exists because flat maps stretch the Pacific and distort the polar regions. The plane is not avoiding the ocean. The map is creating the illusion. Planes do fly over the Pacific, and they have been doing it for generations. But they do not cross it in the simple straight line that a flat map makes people expect. Every route is shaped by the real curve of Earth, the movement of jet streams, the location of emergency airports, the reliability of modern engines, and the safety lessons learned from more than a century of ocean flying. What looks like avoidance is actually precision. What looks like a strange detour is often the smartest path through the sky. The Pacific is not a forbidden zone. It is a massive calculation of distance, wind, fuel, weather, and safety, crossed every day by aircraft following invisible roads above the water.